Landry.Audio, listen, like, and subscribe. If you are on YouTube, be sure to hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and select all to be informed of our content as it goes up. Today's guest is former UFC fighter Elvis Sinosic, who is arguably the reason for where I am in my life at this moment here in Australia. And as I was saying to you, he doesn't realize it, but there's all these multiple touch points from when I landed down here to where I am now. Prior to moving to Australia in late 2004, I didn't have a destination when I decided to come. But I did have a VHS copy of something called Cage Combat, I think at the time, which was the first 8-man cage fighting tournament to take place in Australia, which featured Elvis. And not having much direction on where I was going to end up or where to go, Sydney became the destination for no other fact than at least I knew one guy who I had seen in a tape who was doing something that I was interested in. I ultimately ended up becoming a student of his between 2004 to 2010. Before, if you're no Australian MMA, I went and trained with Larry Papadopoulos in the city. Even getting the chance to work and help Elvis train for his fights, I think at the time with Forrest Griffin and Michael Bisping. I trained with him again after returning from overseas between 2015, I think 16, before there was a split with the gym. He was the cornerman for the fights that I had, and it was at his gym where I sustained an injury to my hand, where I was required to go get an x-ray, which is exactly the instance that led to meeting my wife, who I'm now married with children. And then when I moved up north to Newcastle, it was Elvis who put me in touch with the OG for MMA up in this area of the Hunter, a gentleman named Jamie Ballard. And through his gym, it's how I ended up meeting the other guys, which has led to me becoming a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor up here as well. He's even responsible for coining my nickname, The Lake, which is still used on occasion during the summer months. And he even went out of his way to have the announcer Bruce Buffer do my personal voicemail, which was used for a number of years when he was rostered on the UFC. He's the only guy to have knocked me out in training, which is good or bad, depending upon how you choose to look at that situation, which is the only reason why I have under any form of understanding of concussive symptoms. And when they talk about it in combat sports and football, as I write this out, when I was writing this, he's not a guy that I see face to face anymore, but he's been pretty intrinsic in all these sort of steps I've taken in my life leading up to coming into Australia. I said, I'm in Newcastle and he's in Sydney. So Elvis, my friend, how are you today?
Hey, Jess, I'm doing well. Got to start it off. It's good to be the king. Yeah, we have a long and sordid past together. We've known each other for, as you said, quite a few years, and we've been on and off in contact over that time. Obviously, spending quite a few years together training. So it's been good, and thank you for finally inviting me onto your podcast.
No, I've tried before, and just like everything, it's like, this isn't a full-time gig for most of us, so you just kind of. It's when you can make it happen. So I think we've been talking about this for a while, and ultimately, we both got kids and life goes on. So it's harder to do these things on a regular schedule. But I guess COVID has allowed us to let this happen. But for gym owners like yourself, I guess that's probably a great place to start off. We seem down here in Australia, we seem to be reopening, but it's been really, really hard for a lot of you guys who do this for a living. So do you want to tell me kind of how you've dealt with that and how you've been dealing, I guess, with the last year and a half?
Well, obviously, as you said, it's been kind of difficult with COVID. It's one of those situations that is a little bit perplexing for myself. The health industry, for some reason, seems to be, or the health and fitness industry, so gyms and martial arts schools and the like, seem to be one of the first places they will shut down and one of the last places that they'll open. They tend to hold on to restrictions in gyms and fitness centers more than they do in shopping centers. Again, it's quite surprising because when you think about it, COVID has demonstrated one thing, and that's if you have failing health, then you're more susceptible for severe reactions and death and all that sort of stuff. So you would expect people would want to improve their health, get into the gym regularly. And, the risk of infection, I think, is much lower than a lot of other settings because of the intensity of the training and because what you're doing in the gym, a lot of people won't go to gym classes, even if they're feeling a little bit under the weather, because they know a lot of the times it's more likely to make the situation worse. So you don't get a lot of that. I don't think you have that risk of transmission as you would say in a shopping center, where if someone's got the sniffles, they'll happily go shopping. But if they're feeling blocked up and they can't breathe, they're not going to go to training because they're going to get smashed. They know it, you know. If it's the gym, they're not going to be able to lift the weights they usually do. If it's in jiu-jitsu, they're going to be worried about being overwhelmed by their training partner. Same with boxing or kickboxing. So yeah, you know, it's a bit disappointing to see gyms not given I believe, the respect that they're kind of due. And for large portions of it, we got totally shut down. So we did have to kind of rely on government handouts and subsidies. Sadly, they don't cover all the expenses that are involved in. I mean, even while not operating, there are a lot of costs that go on into keeping the gym running. You've still got to deal with rent. And even though there's rent relief, there are a lot of catches to it and repayment plans. So after the first lockdown, we opened up again. It was a little bit slow at first, but it really started to pick up. And it probably took about 12 months from reopening to finally be able to get ahead of, you know, or back on track to where we were before. Business was picking up. Most of the debts were under control, and I was kind of in a situation where things were looking good. I ended up opening a second gym. So obviously, you know, King's Academy, which was the offshoot from SBMA in the day. So that's kind of like my baby. It's you know, what I've always wanted, you know, a full-time place, having everything under one roof, all that sort of stuff. And now I've opened up a UFC gym, which again is a franchise, but I'm quite passionate about the UFC gym because it brings the values, the benefits, the positives that I see in martial arts to the general public who may not come to a more traditional martial arts gym. They might find it a little bit overwhelming going to a kickboxing or a jiu-jitsu school or something like that, but they'll go into a UFC gym because it's a little bit more public friendly, you know, it's more aimed at the general population, and you get to introduce them to the benefits of things like boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu. And what I love about these sports is that they're things you can keep going for the rest of your life, you know. Even doing, as you would know, doing the same technique week after week, it's done differently every time based on your partner, the spot you are in the day. No technique you do is ever the same 2 times in a row. And I think because of that, it allows you to kind of keep going and going and going and really continuing to learn and appreciate the art. You know, I've been involved in it for probably getting close to 30 years, or about 25, 26 years of jiu-jitsu and well over 30 to 40 years in martial arts. And I'm still going. I still absolutely love it. I'm still learning new stuff. I'm always evolving and adding new things and appreciating what the sport kind of brings. And obviously this next lockdown hit us right. Honestly, for myself, it probably couldn't have come at a worse time. I just finally got ahead of all the debts, and I'd opened up my new gym, and I'd been open for a week when we got shut down. So again, I now had 2 gyms that I had to kind of keep alive until we're able to reopen again. And one of the biggest issues is all the government assistance is based on what you've lost, and they require you to provide financial documents showing what you've lost. You know, so they will go, okay, let's show us what you made in 2019 and what you're doing now.
So in the case of the second gym, you don't have any books behind it.
There's literally nothing I can provide, and then it just causes all sorts of issues in that regard. So, you know, I've dealt with it. I've managed. I'm doing things to ensure that they're not compromised, but it puts a lot more workload behind the scenes for keeping the gyms running. So at the moment, I'm spending most of my time behind the scenes. I'm not in at the gyms. My job is to ensure that everything is running smooth, all the finance and all that is sorted, so that, you know, we can continue to push forward and keep growing. I mean, because a big part of why I do this is, as you would understand, is for my son. You know, I want to create something for him in the future. Obviously, my legacy comes with that, but then there's also financial security that I want to be able to pass on to him as well.
As I said, it's people like me know your opinions on COVID, and it's a very big deal. And I think some people seem to be, I guess, maybe becoming more awake to this, of the extensive lockdowns. As I mentioned, maybe about a year ago, I had Stephen Kesting on, and he was telling me that apparently you guys were having some sort of banter online where he was very, very in favor of lockdowns and you were not. I sway between the two positions. I fundamentally agree with you that business should get on, and it's really up to the individual to decide for themselves what they're going to do. But the argument is you're not a doctor, so listen what the doctors say. But you seem to be posting a lot of evidence. What's your overall perception of this? I know it's not positive, but what do you think we should be doing?
Again, my issue is that the policies that have been implemented since COVID are policies that have never been used realistically in the history of the world, or at least modern history, to deal with any sort of pandemic. All the pandemic policies and procedures were pretty much thrown out the window, and the rest of the Western world copied what China did. And honestly, I don't understand it. We've had issues with China for years, the way they treat their people, the way they disrespect their freedoms. Tiananmen Square is very well known in history. So why the Western world would try and imitate what China is doing is mind-boggling. That's the first part of it. There was a lot of pandemic policy in place. We weren't following it. I do believe, that we do have to do something. I don't disagree with that. I think it should have been more of an issue of quarantining those at risk, the elderly, the sick, putting them into a situation where we could focus our energies on keeping them safe, because the general population, I believe, didn't need it. When you're quarantining healthy people, it's not a quarantine, it's a lockup. You're basically imprisoning healthy people, and it didn't make sense, because we weren't really protecting the general population. We were protecting the at-risk people by locking up the healthy people, and that causes problems. In the fact, the issues I have with lockdown, particularly, getting stuck indoors, not being allowed, closing gyms, is all the things that we need to stay healthy: getting outside, increasing vitamin D levels, eating healthy, exercising, being in nature. All these things boost our immune system. Social interaction is also a very, very big part of it. Interacting with family and friends and other people. Our immune system is also boosted by continued contact with different people and different microbiomes. So all these things which help build our immunity and health, we're being restricted from. So you get restricted from exercising because you can't go out. You get restricted from sun exposure because you've got to stay inside. Now, obviously, people with houses can go in their backyard, but people in apartments in a much more difficult situation. We're not getting the social interaction, and as much as Zoom and things like that are very handy, they don't create the same relationships and connections that we do when we see people face to face. We don't get the microbiome exchange. So I feel like the lockdowns are putting us in a situation where it's actually lowering our health. So when we do get released back into the community, our health is going to be lowered. So, of course, you're going to be more susceptible to infection. So in that regard, I think they were poorly done. I understood the initial lockdown, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Even though it hadn't been done before, I could see the potential benefit to it. But once outside that 2 weeks, there's no benefit. Like, yes, initially you may do it to track and trace, to control the spread, see what is going. But then once you go beyond that 2 weeks, there is no benefit, and you actually start increasing, as I said, lowering your immunity. But then things like alcohol addiction, domestic violence, suicide, all these things go up when people get restricted, get locked up in home, get separated from families. So I just think that they kind of approached it incorrectly, and then instead of going, we made a mistake, tried to double down and just keep doubling down on the situation. So Yeah, look, again, as you said, people say listen to the doctors. The problem is there are a lot of different doctors out there. There is no consensus as to the what should be done. There are obviously two sides, and one of the things about science, one of the beautiful things about science, and why we have progress, is you should have debate, you should have discussions, you should have people disagreeing with each other, so you can compare and reevaluate your position. When one position is being blocked and you cut out debate, then you cut out learning, you cut out knowledge. So it stops becoming science and starts becoming a religion. If you can't discuss another perspective of the situation, then it's no longer about health or growth. It's propaganda. So that's where, you know, on social media and the big tech companies censoring people, I don't believe censorship is a positive thing. It's not something that's going to help the community. The greatest thing about the internet was the availability of information across the world and the ability to connect with anyone. And I think you saw knowledge really go up through as a result of the internet. You know, general people's ability, you said, to just go into Google and learn new stuff, find information. And then when you start censoring that, you start limiting the ability of people to learn and to kind of expand. Because if you keep seeing the same thing, if everyone agrees, then there's no reason to move forward or grow. So
Yeah.
again, it's a very complex situation all across the board. From
Oh, I lost you there, Elvis. Dropped out. You've gone mute. Now I've lost your video. There we go. You're back.
Sorry, someone tried to call me.
That's all right. So what do you reckon then? It still seems to be newsworthy. Again, we're so far removed from the northern hemisphere and, you know, North America and Europe and everything, but I am still reading news about debates between CNN and Joe Rogan about his choice of taking ivermectin, which they just continually to push as horse medicine. I don't believe that you're anti-vaccine. I know that I've gotten it as well. I also know people that have had reactions to getting this. Why can't there be any sort of more dialogue about potential alternative medicines without getting into, you know, natural therapy type stuff around this? Why is there so much hesitancy to even look? Because it sounds like he's had all the options. He's done the full gamut of treatment, and this was one portion. And effectively, he's saying, like, through multiple treatments, I was able to knock this over in what, 4 to 5 days.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, monoclonal antibodies, ivermectin, vitamin D, vitamin C. He did a whole range of things, and they're all things that really are not, other than the monoclonal antibodies, not particularly expensive, should be easily available to everyone. And what I don't understand about these things is none of them are high risk. So you'd think that even if the government believes that they may not be as effective as they'd want, any benefit is benefit. And if it's not at a risk, then why would you prevent it? Sadly, I think it's more the reason we're not able to use these other therapies isn't because of their benefit or risk. I think it's more a financial position where the big pharma companies have put restrictions on the government. I've seen a lot of these contracts which have been released from different countries with Pfizer in the country, and they're extremely limiting. They actually state in these contracts that you cannot recommend or use alternate therapies. And there's a lot of other restrictions. And even though I haven't seen the Australia one, most of them across the different countries are very similar. So I have no doubt that our contracts with Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna and all those are very similar to what you're seeing across the world. So I think it's more financial disincentives and political positioning that are putting us in a position where we can't use these therapies. Now, as you said, I'm not anti-vax. I just took my little one down to the doctor literally a couple of days ago for his 18 months vaccination. I am pro-freedom. I am pro-choice. And I think the vaccines need to be rolled out correctly. And I don't think mass immunization of the entire planet, including those not at risk, is the right way to do it. We've never done that before, even with things like polio and that. We only vaccinate those that are at risk. Meningococcal, you don't see adults getting meningococcal vaccination. You see kids getting it because the kids are the ones that are at risk. Same with COVID. I don't think it should be a mass immunization policy. I think we should be vaccinating the elderly at the risk and the ill and those with comorbidities because they're at risk. And the risk of adverse reactions is outweighed by the risk of COVID because of the situation they're in. I don't believe that risk is outweighed by basically people under 50, definitely under 18. The risk of COVID is almost zero, whereas the risk of adverse reactions is, 100-fold more than what the risk of COVID is. So I think, again, it's the same as lockdowns. They've been misapplied. I believe it's instead of realizing they've made a mistake, instead of saying, we should change the policy, they're just doubling down and going, we need to hammer it home. We want to get everyone to do it. I mean, when you look at the stats around the world, the countries with the highest vaccination rates have the highest infection rates. It's not difficult to see. The information is there. The question is do you want to see it? Are you willing to look at these studies? The risk to myocarditis is particularly high in young men. So, under 18 males. Again, it's something like 10 to 20 times the risk of what it would be from COVID.
How would you possibly explain it? I think we're going to have to move on because if anyone's listening to this, I think they want to hear about fighting. But how do you try to even explain that? When you talk about in countries with high vaccination rates, we've got the highest level of infection, which are generally also the places that we've had lockdowns. It doesn't seem to make sense if we're given a vaccine and cooped up away from each other. How does this sort of explain its spread then?
Okay. So I'm not going to deep dive into this because it is a fairly complex situation. I mean, part of it is, there are other factors as well when it comes to infection rates, and that's northern climates tend to not have as higher vitamin D levels because of the shortened summer months and things like that. They're not getting as much sun. Higher density of living also causes problems. So the closer you are to people. But I think the biggest issue is that these are what are known as leaky vaccines. So when you look at our traditional vaccines, they provide immunity. So once you get vaccinated, you're not going to get infected, or the amount of people who are going to get infected is a very small amount once you're vaccinated when you look at our traditional vaccines. So traditional vaccines, about 95 to 99% of the people will not get infection when faced with the virus or the bacteria or whatever. Whereas these vaccines, what are known as leaky vaccines, because they don't prevent infection and they don't prevent transmission. So it means everyone who gets vaccinated has the same ability to transfer the virus as someone who's unvaccinated.
Okay.
Now, the problem comes, these vaccines reduce symptoms. So what that means is people with a higher viral load are not showing the same symptoms as an unvaccinated person. You may have two people with the same amount of viral load. The unvaccinated person will be sniffly, sick, not feeling well because the symptoms haven't been reduced. The vaccinated person, because it reduces symptoms, it doesn't reduce the illness. It may shorten the term of the illness, but you're not going to feel sick. You're going to feel okay. And because you're not feeling those symptoms, you're more likely to go out shopping. You're more likely to connect with other people. And so you're more likely to spread the disease than if you're unvaccinated. Because as I said, when you're unvaccinated, you get the full force of it. You feel sick, even though it's not going to cause severe reaction. You're more likely to stay at home, have chicken soup, or take your medication, lie in bed, rugged up, until you feel better before you go out. When you're vaccinated, you're not. You don't feel those symptoms, so you don't feel like you're at risk, and you're more likely to go out and spread the virus.
Okay.
I think hopefully that takes us there. So let's get on to some MMA because let's get
We
into
will
something a little
be
bit
here
more
all day.
interesting and
All right.
fun.
Okay. So anyway, as I was saying, I think what 35 minutes of that, and people are going, who is this guy? I want to hear about the UFC and MMA, all that jazz. So I think a good place to start out, just for anyone that might not be too familiar with you, we've comparatively to when you used to compete to who we've got now, we've probably got two new generation of fans that have possibly come through in that time period. Do you want to just give a very, very brief overview, how you got into the sport? We know that you're a teacher now, and then I'll ask you some more specific questions around that.
Sure. So I grew up in the Bruce Lee era. So I'd always been a big fan of Bruce Lee, use what's effective, discard what's not. And I kind of always had that back in my mind. As a young child, I wanted to get to martial arts. I started with judo at my primary school, did that for a couple of years, and went to high school, ended up doing taekwondo. Then went to uni where I kind of stopped training martial arts. I did a few other sports and ended up actually playing pro beach volleyball for a couple of years during university. Then during that time, I was traveling to Sydney a lot, realized I want to kind of move up there. Once I quit university or finished university, graduated, started working full time, my first job, which was ADAB, which is now AusAid, a government agency. One of the guys there was someone I went to high school with, and he did Kyokushin karate, and he's like, hey, you should get back into training again. And he handed over these VHS tapes, which the people of today probably have no idea what it is. These lovely rectangular packages you put in your box so you can watch your DVDs on TV.
Grainy video.
And it was UFC 2 with the wonderful Hoist Gracie and Frank Shamrock. You got that back
that
there.
One. I think that's
nice.
The second one. Yeah.
So that was the first one that I saw. And that got me fired up. I started looking for...
No word of a lie.
Nice.
VHS. Yeah.
I started looking for a martial arts school that had, like jiu-jitsu and stuff because of Hoist Gracie. There was nothing in Canberra back in that time. That would have been back 93, 4, around that sort of time.
Yeah.
I found a Jun Fan school. For those that don't know, it was the Bruce Lee style. He started with Jun Fan, which eventually evolved into Jeet Kune Do. The instructor there was teaching stick and knife, grappling. It was kind of the Jeet Kune Do, Jun Fan style grappling. I had elements of Machado Jiu-Jitsu in it, but it was still quite raw. And then with a little bit of Muay Thai or a Silat strike, empty hand striking. So it was kind of a mini MMA, Jeet Kune Do, Jun Fan type school. And that kind of got me interested into it. I found the Australasian Fighting Arts magazine, which doesn't exist anymore, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. Jess, an old martial arts magazine, which had some information about the Gracies. And then I got Blitz, which at the time was owned by John Will. And he did a big story on traveling to Brazil, meeting the Gracie family and then the Machado family over there. And he brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back to Australia and introduced it, to a lot of different people. And, he's basically the father of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu here in Australia. And then my coach, Anthony Lange, got in touch with him and then started training with him. And when I ended up moving to Sydney, going to Anthony Lange's gym in Manly Primary School, started training there for quite a few years, ended up meeting my good friend Anthony. We ended up opening SPMA. I did that for about 14 years before we decided we wanted to go our separate ways. We kind of had different visions on what we wanted to do. And then that's where it kind of headed into King's Academy and then working with UFC gym to try and bring jiu-jitsu and MMA to the general population.
Mm.
Hopefully that's concise enough.
It's good, and then we'll get into because I met you through what was and it's interesting to say this because I guess even at the time there were pure MMA schools, but SPMA was a BJJ school that also got into MMA, and I think they're very, very different because a lot of people, even now when you can watch professional fighting, you see guys that come up just doing MMA, and
Yep.
they're all rounded as opposed to having like a core specialty, I guess, what they can come in. But it's interesting that you mentioned that because I've never actually had the chance to ask that question about the history of BJJ in Australia, because we're always told it's John Will of Dirty Dozen, and you're telling me he was actually the owner of Blitz magazine as well, was he?
That's correct. He ended up selling it. Now, so what happened was, might as well get into it. It is quite an interesting story. John Will owned Blitz and was using that to travel. He went to Indonesia, competed at the, I think, Salat World Championships. He was a Salat World Champion. Went to India, wrestled in the pits of India, all sorts of pretty cool stuff. I'm just going to pause for a second.
Yeah.
And around that time when he was running that magazine, now, I apologize, I can't remember, but apparently a Brazilian BJJ fighter came to Australia and put out an ad that says, I will fight anyone, no rules, for $50,000. So you put up $50,000, I put up $50,000, winner takes all sort of thing. Now, John was like, oh, sounds like an interesting challenge, something I'd be kind of interested in maybe participating in or whatever. But he's also the sort of person that doesn't jump in without, checking the depth of the water and what's going on. So, he looked into this guy. He's from Brazil, did something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, hadn't heard of it before. So that's when he decided to travel to Brazil. I ended up going to Gracie Barra, meeting the people there, got introduced to Hagen, came back to Australia, showed all his students, go, wow, this is fantastic. And then, then ended up taking his students back to Brazil to introduce them to the Gracie Barra. One of those students was Peter Devine at the time. So then he came back. Now, John was, I think, revolutionary at the time. I don't think people really appreciate his understanding of the martial arts. Back then, he believed in the value of not ignoring the different other martial arts. It's like, so even though he was teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he still did, Muay Thai style striking. He still added wrestling. He called that system shoot fighting, which would be pretty much the precursor to what we would refer to as MMA today. And at that time, Peter Devine goes, no, all you need is jiu-jitsu. And so he kind of broke away, ended up affiliating with Gracie Barra and, setting up the AFBJJ. But he was, John Will's student and introduced to BJJ through John. So John really is the father of jiu-jitsu here in Australia, bringing it over and introducing us to it through that kind of interesting story with the challenge. And the funny thing is, I think John's now gone more pure jiu-jitsu. He's more interested in, I think, because as a martial art, jiu-jitsu offers a little bit more of a holistic approach. It's something you can continue doing, well into your older years, where I think MMA style training is a little harsher, as you've discovered.
Don't get ahead of me here. I got a journey I want to take you on here. We're already talking about how do we do this as we get older.
Detail there. But yeah, he was quite revolutionary in the value of MMA training, and at a time he was quite an emphasis. But then he's kind of switched to more the martial way, and we can discuss, as you said, those other issues. And so, yeah, it is quite interesting to see. And, then in New South Wales, it was Anthony Lange was, a big part of it. There was Sean up in Maitland, John Simon not long after, obviously Larry Papadopoulos. Even though he wasn't doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he was kind of doing Jiu-Jitsu and grappling and wrestling until he affiliated with John Donahue. but he'd been to Japan, competed in pancras and Shudo.
Yeah.
So, they were a big part of building the grappling community in Australia. So in about, 94, 95, they had, submission grappling championships here in New South Wales. And then obviously around the 2000s, a few Brazilians came over. It was like Paulo, Bruno, Marcelo. And they set up the New South Wales BJJ Federation. And obviously, they connected with Peter in Melbourne, and the circuit kind of built up from there. So it's quite an interesting history. And honestly, it's pretty awesome to have been part of it, to see the growth and development of the sport almost from the very start. Obviously, I wasn't there at the very early days of John Well, but close enough to have heard the stories and experienced them, and spoken to those people involved at the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been trying to organize the tree and understand a little bit more, because we know it hasn't been around very long, so we know within a 30-year span we should have it covered. What did I want to ask about that? So when you had said when John Will came back, again, this might only be because when I started training with you guys, we're under the Machado brand. And for anyone that's not listening, you're effectively Machado and Gracie, even though Machado comes from Gracie as well. They kind of trees that spin off there. But at least in the time that I'm here, it really sounds like Machado Jiu-Jitsu was the first one in the pool over here, because it sounds like the foundational characters are all Machado guys prior to the Gracies coming over. Am I broadly understanding that correctly, that they were at least in here a few years before the Gracies moved over here?
Yeah, I believe so. I think, I'm pretty sure. I mean, other than I think his name was Pedro, that came over and made the challenge. He didn't actually bring Jiu-Jitsu over. He brought the idea of it, but obviously didn't bring it. John brought it over. So yeah, it would have, whether you say it was Machado or Gracie, because as I said, John Will did go to Gracie Barra first.
Okay.
And then through Gracie Barra met the Machados, and obviously the Machados.
But that's not here, because he's already over in he's already in the States doing this, isn't he? Or is that over here?
No, I think at the very start they'd either just headed over to the States, but were back in Brazil, because he met him at the mats, I believe with like Enzo and Hagen. They were down there training at Baja. Now, what a lot of people won't know is the Machados actually ran Gracie Baja for several years. So I think Carlos Gracie Jr. Started it. Then I think he ended up going somewhere else, like Ipanema, for a few years, and the Machados took over. They were running it. I don't know if it was called Gracie Baja or whatever, but they were running that academy for quite a few years. And then Carlos came back, and then they gave the gym back to him, and then they ended up moving to the US. And while they were there, they were actually training with and helping Horian, because Horian obviously introduced it to the US. And then obviously they had the problem with Horian trademarking the name Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, so they couldn't use it. So that's why they used their surname Machado and called theirs Machado Jiu-Jitsu, mainly because Horian wouldn't allow them to use it without having to pay royalties and that sort of thing. And that's also why you will find that all the other branches of Gracie Baja, Hickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Humada, they all started creating their own Gracie name, because the term Gracie Jiu-Jitsu could only be used by approved people from Horian. So these people like Hickson couldn't call what he did Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So that's why he called his style Hickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And again, so it was just about someone trying to get all
of the money,
profit from, basically profit from the name and the sport. And that's again why it's now called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I honestly think if Horian hadn't done that, everyone around the world would be doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu today. They wouldn't be doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It would be Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, because that's what, it was kind of what it was referred to. And that's what a lot of obviously there is a second branch separate to the the Gracie lineage as well. But I think, I think he kind of restricted the potential infamy or fame of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So now it's just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all the different schools. Even among Gracies, there's, like you said, sub-schools with
7 brands of it. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with. Yeah,
Gracie Pomada and all that sort of stuff. Gracie Oceana over here. So yeah, and that's kind of part of why teams started developing, and then different academies and associations built off that, as people wanted to obviously gain recognition for what they were doing in the sport, whether as a competitor or as a coach.
And so it goes John Will to Anthony Lange. You guys started under Lange. I think you're directly affiliated with Carlos these days, which is it's a very, very small community. So I was thinking, Carlos Machado pops up, and you got Travis Luter, Kevin Holland, Stephen Thompson, all these guys that still train with him for fights. But as we move on from there, I guess probably, and we're going to have him on as a guest shortly, probably the biggest name who I hadn't realized was an Anthony Lange guy is that if you like martial arts, as a gentleman by the name of Sonny Brown, who's really building a name for himself in the space with his breakdowns. So once we move across to Melbourne, then is it John Donahue who's down there who ended up being the first NRL coach? Is he the one that started doing the grapple tackle stuff with?
Yes, that's that. Yeah, that's correct. So John Donahue came over. Wanted to work with John Will with the Machado, because he got his I believe he got his black belt after John. So John Will got it first. He's what, as you mentioned earlier, one of the dirty dozen, one of the first dozen non-Brazilians to get a black belt in the world, which is a pretty cool thing to kind of have. John Donahue was shortly after, I believe was like a Higan Machado black training partner and student. He ended up getting his black belt from Higan, coming to Australia, trying to work with John Will, and obviously for whatever reason they didn't kind of get on, so he ended up going a different branch, affiliating with a different association. He kind of wanted to set up his own, like a lot of the Brazilians as well, wanted to set up his own association, get his own recognition for what he was doing, and through
is he still a Machado affiliate then, or is he a Gracie guy, or does he brand himself with either one of these days?
I'm trying to. No, it's actually off the he's part of the non-Gracie lineage. I'm having a mental blank on the team at the moment.
Call them Globetrotters.
Yeah. So it's the same team that Jose Aldo and that is part of.
All right. Okay. Well, you're jogging my memory now. I can't remember off the top of my head. So how do we get to, because at the moment the best guys, maybe competition wise, but who are also doing the instructionals and demonstrating is, we've got the Absolute team, which is where Lockie comes out, and I think that's originally where Craig Jones has come out. Were they also part of the same Will Machado lineage in terms of where they've come from?
I think some of them did come from that. There were obviously by that time there were Brazilians had come from overseas as well. So as I mentioned earlier, in the 2000s, we had those that came and first set up the New South Wales Federation, and then more Brazilians started coming over to Sydney, and then Melbourne, and then Perth, and then Brisbane. So lots of different Brazilians and Brazilian lineages and teams started coming over. And while I remember, it's Nova União is who John Donahue affiliated with. So, but yeah, different lineages. I believe Lachlan was at one stage training as part of the Machado lineage, and then ended up moving over to a different team, and then becoming part of the Absolute team over there, where they kind of started specializing in leg attacks, which they've become quite well known with. And obviously, one of the biggest names outside of Lachlan, Craig Jones, who's now
B team, which is the best name for a training team ever. No, we're not quite good enough. Yeah,
not far behind. But yeah, so it is interesting how interconnected everything is. not just here in Australia, but around the world. So
yeah. I mean, there's other guys, like, I'm really surprised. Like, I remember someone was telling me, I spoke to Dennis Roberts, who is a BJJ guy, as part of our crew, who went and decided to go do wrestling. And then I found out apparently he was a wrestling instructor working with the AKA guys for a number of years before he's bounced over to KO Terra's Jiu-Jitsu club. So he's just kind of, like, literally gone from higher to higher to higher. And it's I don't know, frankly, I find it fascinating that through this web of lineage, you can reach out and touch, like Cain Velasquez or DC or someone along those lines. I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. As I said, and look, I've been involved, thankfully, in both the MMA and the jiu-jitsu scene, and I've, managed to make many great connections. I mean, having fought in the same event as Mario Sperry in the first event in Australia, and then having met Mario, and then Paul Bustamante, and then Paulo Filho, and all these different other people through the MMA, and then through my jiu-jitsu, having met Marcelo Garcia, John Donahue. Obviously, I've trained in Brazil, obviously a lot with Carlos in Texas, and then having gone to the US and trained with guys like Forrest Griffin and Frank Mir, and it's been pretty awesome how easy it is to kind of make the connection with some of the biggest names in the sport and the industry.
Let's kind of move on. We'll touch base on some of this stuff because I really like talking about some of the guys that we've got in there. But when we look at how MMA has changed as a sport, and so again, as I said, in my opinion, because I'm 40 now, you're a little bit older than me, I think we've effectively got 2 generations between us from when kind of your heyday or when we kind of remember the sport as it was. We've got guys like in their late 20s and probably late teens coming up through it now. Fundamentally, I'll talk about the training, how that's changed, but how do you think the sport itself has changed? It seems like, it piddle paddle along. Zuffa decides to make a buyout, drags, goes into a huge amount of debt without the benefit of the Ultimate Fighter, which skyrockets it through. Then we have, a few kind of real breakthrough stars, which kind of seems to start with, maybe not Couture, but then we end up with get this sort of like trifecta of Ronda Rousey, Lesnar, and Conor all coming within the same 5-year period. But outside of that, do you remember any sort of big milestones of where you go, like, this is kind of being acknowledged, or people are recognizing this now?
Yeah, look, back when I started, I mean, it was treated more as a spectacle rather than a sport. Like, I was in the days of, it was called no holds barred, valet tudo, which translates to anything goes. And it was more about being a testing ground where you kind of threw these people into the cage to see who would come out on top and which style would be the most successful. And then as that kind of developed, so for the first couple of years, it was style versus style. So we wanted to see, was karate better than judo? Was kickboxing better than wrestling? Was boxing better than kempo? And then it kind of hit a point where people started realizing that if you wanted to succeed, you needed to understand what everyone else was doing. And you started seeing people cross-training, places like the Lions then, Pat Militich's gym. They started bringing in experts from different fields. So as you mentioned earlier, people were still specialists. So you had your jiu-jitsu guys, your wrestlers, your kickboxers, but they didn't rely on that specialty alone. So the wrestlers started learning submission defense, started learning striking, because you needed to be able to break the distance with striking to be able to get into your wrestling range. If you took someone down while ground and pounding, you need to be able to survive submissions. If you're a kickboxer, you need to be able to get back to your feet. And Maurice Smith was one of the, so first you had Mark Coleman, who introduced ground and pound. So that was one of the big transitions from...
And can openers and headbutts.
Yeah. So Mark Coleman is the father of ground and pound. So he brought ground and pound, which was the one thing that was able to kind of challenge jiu-jitsu on the ground. So their goal was to stay safe from submissions, get into a position of posture where they could punch an elbow to try and defeat the person on their back. And I think that was a big transition where people started learning wrestling, because even after that, even the jiu-jitsu guys wanted to be on top because they realized the danger of being on the bottom. So that was a big step forward. Then in Extreme Fighting Championships, EFC, there was Maurice Smith. So he was kind of one of the first people that kind of introduced what we now know as sprawl and brawl. So he learned how to survive off his back, how to get back to his feet, and then how to basically defend takedowns and use his striking to kind of win the fight. So, that was a big transitionary period where we started seeing that. And then, as you mentioned, when Zuffa took over, it was the formalization of the sport. So creating categories, weight categories, and making it more sport-like. So involving athletic commissions, having more rules in place. Back in the days, it was just no biting, no eye gouging, no fish hooking. Very simple. Everything else was pretty much go for it. Groin shots were used, as we saw in some of the earlier fights with Keith Hackney and the like. The Zuffa bringing it in and introducing the athletic commissions mean they had to have rules. They had to have rules about the size of the cage, the thickness of the mat, who could be in the cage, what you could do. So that kind of formalized the rule setting, made it from a spectacle into a sport. So that was, obviously a very big step. And obviously, so that was huge when it went from SEG to Zuffa. That was a big time. And then obviously you had Tito. I think he was probably one of the biggest early stars of the sport. He understood the value of media and trash talking and getting people interested in watching him fight, whether it was to win or lose. It didn't matter as long as they tuned in to see him fight, and he understood that. And I think that's where the Huntington Beach bad boy kind of came from. And then there was Chuck Liddell, who introduced the use of the cage, using the cage to get back to your feet. For a long time, the cage was used as a weapon, whereas the ground and pound guys would push their opponent up against the cage so they could pin them there and beat them up with ground and pound. Chuck formalized kind of using the cage to get back to his feet so he could continue. So he was a wrestler, and he kind of used his wrestling not to take people down, but to stay on his feet. And if he did get taken down, to get to the cage and get back to his feet. Then the next transitionary phase was Randy Couture, which was using the cage itself as a weapon or control tool. So he would use the cage not just to take people down, but to pin people up against the cage, punish them on the cage, and then when the timing was right, take them down to the ground, whether it was at the end of the round so he could beat them up in the shortest amount of time so we would avoid submission risk, or if he had them hurt enough, he'd take them down on the cage to kind of try and finishing them there. So, you got those different stages. First, the grapplers coming on top, and then the wrestlers adding ground and pound and using the cage, and then the sprawl and brawl, and then the wrestlers coming back using the cage to pin people up. And then it's kind of from that evolved into all the different elements. So now cage work is a big part of MMA training, whether it's for takedown defense, whether it's for takedown, whether it's for getting back to your feet, which is just as important as the grappling, which is just as important as the striking, which is just as important as the takedowns, which is just as important as the conditioning. So it's been, a lot of evolution over the years. I think as people become more savvy and become less specialized, I think you're seeing a more striking dominance in the sport, because I think one of the problems with being too well-rounded is if you're well-rounded, generally it's harder to take someone down who has decent takedown defense unless you're a specialist. So that's why you do see exceptions, guys that come with exceptionally strong wrestling backgrounds like Khabib and a few of the other guys.
Shemaev and all these Dagestani guys that are coming in. Yeah.
The welterweight champ at the moment as well. He's got his fight coming up. You get a couple of specialists, and because their wrestling is so strong, because they come from a very specialist background, they can kind of break that trend towards a striking dominated sort of sport. Even like you look at Jon Jones, who's one of the greats, and he really, when he first started, he took everyone down and ground and pound, like destroyed them with elbows and ground and pound. And now he's kind of switched his style to staying on their feet. And I think,
do you really think it's that? Because I noticed, like, before he decided to bounce, the major difference that I fundamentally noticed is that all of a sudden the light heavyweight contenders matched his body type. So I don't necessarily feel that it was that he stopped taking them down, but once we hit kind of Gustafsson and then we get into all those other ones, all the guys that he started fighting were, 6'8", 6'9" as well.
No, honestly, I don't think that's what it is. I think when he was first coming up, his goal was to beat people the easiest way possible. It was just about winning. I think once he started winning and became champion, he developed this mindset of, I want to beat you at what you're good at.
Okay.
So if you look at the Gus fight, he kept the fight standing for most of it. But when you look at the rematch, because he took it down. Because he'd already beaten Gus at his strength, now he wanted to beat Gus at his strength. It was the same thing when he fought DC. He even stated his goal was to out-wrestle DC. And he took DC down a couple of times in their first fight. In the second fight, his goal wasn't to beat DC at wrestling, it was just to beat DC. And he obviously had that stand-up, and he had the left kick in his mind.
I know he said that. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about, because if you look at Gus one and Dom Ray's fight, those are arguably the two I'd say he lost despite winning on the scorecards.
Yeah, and again, they were both fights that he wanted to fight at their strength and beat them at what they're good at. And I think that's part of the reason why I don't think he will get the recognition for being as good as he is, because he's not like GSP was different. GSP knew what he was good at, and his goal was to implement his game plan regardless what the other person wanted to do.
And when he didn't, he paid for it by Sarah.
Yeah, it was different. It was, yeah, absolutely. But then you look at Jones, as I said, at the start, absolutely dominating. And then suddenly he's fighting people at their strengths. And people are saying, oh, he's not as good as he used to be. And I disagree. I think he was as good. And I think because he's so good, he was willing to put himself out of his comfort zone to win. And I don't think a lot of people will appreciate what he did for that, because he's such a head case. Because he does have so many issues outside of the cage, people take that to believe he's not as good as he was in the cage. And I actually believe those issues out of the cage are probably why he tries to do what he does in the cage. I think he's trying to prove he's the best by beating people at what he's not good at, but what they're good at. And I think that's part of his head case position. Like he has, I mean,
maybe I also find it hard to get in, and besides what you talk about what he does outside of I find it these days, outside of where there's drama with guys like DC, it's very, very hard to get excited about a Jon Jones fight, because the challengers tend not to pressure him too much. So it follows this tempo where Jon is going to get the best of him by round 2, 3, or 4, somewhere along those lines. Like I was just rewatching the Anthony Johnson fight, and there's just really, effectively from the opening bell, he's on the back foot. You're not really watching it's not like the lighter classes where they're really going head to head, or what we're kind of seeing out of the heavyweight division at the moment.
Yeah, no, look, I agree. And I think that's a lot to do with his dominance and his ability. And again, part of the problem when you're trying to fight at someone else's strengths is he's not able to pressure to the same way as if he was fighting as his strength. As I said, when you look at the rematches he has, extremely dominating and much more exciting. But when you look at the fights, when he fights someone as the first time after about the first couple of defenses, I'm trying to think, after Rampage.
Was it Machida after that, or was that?
Yeah, I think from Machida onwards, he started fighting people at their strengths after he'd kind of pretty much crushed most of the people that were in front of him. He started going I'm going to beat you what you're good at. That's why he took that on Chael Sonnen, and why he stayed standing with Gus, why he wrestled with. Because when you look at it back and actually look at how he fights these people, it makes more sense. When you watch it at the time, it doesn't. It just to the uninformed or the unaware is probably a better term. For the unaware, it looks like he's struggling.
Yeah.
And that's what people are. He struggled. No, he didn't struggle. He's trying to beat them at their game. So he's not going to look as dominant or as good as he would be if he put it his way. So I don't know. I think it's going to affect his legacy a little bit. Maybe in the future, people will look back and be able to, when they look at it that way, get a better understanding for what he did. But again, it's going to be overshadowed by a lot of what's happened outside of the cage and whether he ever gets back into the cage again.
I think he'll definitely come back. I think the photos seem to showing that he's definitely trying to get beyond 265 to move in, and he looks like he's getting close to that. But so when I was talking about the changes, that there's, I guess in my opinion, I notice a lot of guys don't really go for, I was going to say, well, we seem to be losing things like double legs. We hear Gagey talking about it's too much energy. Dillashaw stuff, they really seem to go for the grab on a hip lock and toss from there. I was going to say, we seem to be moving away from that completely into this Greco-Roman. And then this weekend, we have Glover Teixeira win the belt out of nowhere, doing exactly this blueprint of pinning people up against the wall and taking them through. Calf kicks have come in. I noticed that the big issue between kickboxers moving in is not the ability that you can't shell with boxing gloves, but the big one that strikes out to me, and this is kind of what I want to get your opinions on, and you had specifically mentioned, because I think that's, if I'm not mistaken, the first time I'd seen that was Jon Jones' Rampage, where the oblique kicks at range. And I think I can't think of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was it a month or two ago, was it Jared Cannonier who finished a match like that with a sidestep on someone of an oblique kick that literally just buckled his knee completely. What do you, it's beginning to be more, because this is no holds barred fighting, but what do you think of sort of like very, very quick moves that are career ending in that space? Because we're not really talking about arm breaks or leg locks where you might be able to see them coming. These are literally strikes designed to blast joints, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Look, I really don't think they're as great a risk as people make out to be. I do think they're risky, but look, getting kicked in the head is risky. You know what I mean? Getting punched in the head is risky. It's like,
so I'm told.
I don't want to see an over watered down version of the sport. You saw what happened with Jacare and his arm.
Yes.
When the guy transitions suddenly into the arm bar, that went on quick. We've seen guys with leg locks that just come on in seconds. Obviously, Palahares is a well-known leg locker in that regard. And look, it's just part of the sport. And again, it's something that I think is, if you're a smart fighter and you're aware of it and you follow certain principles of fighting, you can deal with it. It's like I've seen lots of people deal with the kicks without issues, and then I've seen people struggle with it. But then I see the same thing. I see some people get taken down and get back to their feet easily. I see some guys get taken down and have no idea what to do with their back. It's up to you as the fighter or the coach, molding their fighter to ensure that they understand what the skills that they need to develop are, what the risks are, and how to kind of mitigate that. And if you're going to be fighting Jones, you should be looking at tape. You should be working out a strategy for the oblique kicks that are going to be coming. It would be no different than if you were facing Khabib and you wanted to deal with his wrestling. There would be no difference if you were dealing with elbows from Matt Brown. You just have to look at, this is one of the evolutions of the sport. Back in the day, it was an 8-man. You'd jump in there, you'd fight whoever it was, and you just had to use your skills. You didn't worry about your opponent's skills, where now today it's more of an evolved, developed sport where the same as football and soccer and rugby, the teams look at who they're going to play and they develop strategies based on the team they're going to play. It's the same for MMA. When you go in there, you should be developing strategies based on your opponent building your skill set and your game plan based on what you're good at, what they're good at, and how to overcome your opponent's strengths. It's just part of the game. I really don't think it's as big a deal. You know, I fought with head stomps, head kicks on the ground, and you know, they're considered dangerous. But when you're not aware of it, you put yourself in a situation where you could get head kicked a lot. So the people go, oh, I could knee him in the head, I could kick him in the head. It's because he doesn't have to defend again. He doesn't need to be aware of it. Once you're aware of it, you train for it. When I fought Frank Shamrock in K1, there was, you know, stomps and kicks on the ground. When I fought in the Vale-Tudo Open, there was stomps and kicks on the ground. You just adjusted your game plan, your skill set, your strategy based on what the rules are, what your opponent was capable of, and you turned up to fight.
Yeah, fair enough. And what do you think about sport BJJ now? So I had mentioned guys like Absolute now. You've already mentioned the leg lock game. I like having this conversation. I'm trying to, before we did, so I guess, you know, we go back to UFC 1. I remember Ken Shamrock putting that on Pat Smith. Pat Smith. Then, you know, you mentioned Rusmar Palhars, which begs, you know, does a referee even do anything in a match? Guys that I remember that kind of busted out of the UFC, like Marcin Held, who I think then went on to Bellator, who was based around that game. Gary Tonin, Ryan Hall, they seem to have sorted out his system now. Before we talk about guys who base their game on there, let me ask this question, because you had also talked about, when you talked about Couture and Habib, one of the things that I talk to my guys about in the gym is fundamentally the difference in grappling between MMA and BJJ is you don't have to pass. You just have to be able to restrict their hip movement a lot of the time to set up your striking. And now that BJJ has evolved and I don't really know at which point it started like that. I don't know if it started with De La Riva, which then evolved into Berimbolo, which then sorry, what's the term I'm looking for? Reverse or inverted guard, rather, which then started creating all of these variations on leg locks. But I've noticed, like, a lot of gyms, it's like this is where they go immediately. No longer is the game about learning how to control and pass the hips. These guys are effectively saying, I don't need to learn takedowns. I don't need to learn how to pass. I'm just going to grab onto a leg. And the question that I'm getting at now is, do you think this sort of curriculum, when they move towards that, are we into too much of a niche specialized sport for what it does now that doesn't fundamentally address what it's supposed to do as a martial art and furthermore as a combat sport anymore?
Well, look, again, it would come down to, again, individual gyms, what your goal is. To be honest, you know, in today's society, you probably don't need the same level of self-defense, hand-to-hand combat that you would in previous years.
Pretty soft is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, it's not, you don't see those sort of exchanges happening anywhere as much. Like back in the day, pub fights were fairly common. They would happen. You need to know how to defend yourself. Nowadays, not so much. I think society's changed. I mean, you know, firearms change things, a higher police presence change things. So you're not seeing that same requirement for self-defense. So now people are more doing it for enjoyment, for sport. So I have no issue with that. I think it's a part of it. It's an important part of it. Yeah, and I think they're good. I think they introduce more people. I think it makes it a little bit more exciting. And again, a lot of these sport-only developments also do transition into MMA, like when you see things like the Imanari roll and Ryan Hall rolling into his 50-50. So it can be used. A lot of it may not be entirely applicable to self-defense and the like, but most of those places still teach very good fundamentals before they start inverting and things like that. What is actually very interesting is several years before we started seeing inversions and berimbolos, is Higan Machado did a seminar in Melbourne. So every year we have what's called The Gathering. John Wills, our Machado national championships. It's a get together. We come down, we compete as Team Machado, we get to socialize. And then the next day, John runs a couple of seminars for instructors, and then for colored belts, and then for white belts with Hagen Machado. And years and years ago, like several years before Berimbolos came about, Hagen comes in and goes, oh, this is going to be the next big thing. We're going to do a seminar on this inverted guard. And he, had this little entry where you invert and you're attacking from upside down. And, we played with it. And as you would be aware, it was one of the things we put into our syllabus on our brown belt grading. We've got the inverted guard stuff in there.
Can't stand
we still keep it there because it's just because it's got a great connection to history and stuff. But at the time, it's like it was fun, and we put something in. We put it there because it gave you an appreciation of the ability of the sport to be able to evolve and change based on what's happening, your physical attributes, and what people are doing. But I never thought it would ever become a big part of the game. I was thinking, what? Inverting is tricky. It may catch someone off guard when you do it once, when they're not expecting it. But then now to suddenly be a major part of the international competitions, admittedly, predominantly with the smaller guys, because it is a lot easier for the smaller guys to invert than a lot of the bigger guys. But it's funny. So, it was even before De La Riva was becoming really popular. Obviously, De La Riva, I think, was around, but it wasn't super popular. But the inverted guard actually came from a cross grip, closed guard setup. So it was even, no De La Riva. It was even from a kneeling opponent, not even a standing opponent.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know if it's related or if it's just coincidental, but Hagen introduced that inverted guard. We played with it, and then several years, suddenly everyone's going upside down and inverting and using it to take the back and things like that. So it is kind of interesting to see stuff that develop and kind of become a mainstay in the sport that at the time I never really thought it would be that big. So, yeah.
Do you think you had mentioned Ryan Hall. I mean, you're going back in time to Imanari. Do you ever think a leg locker where that is their specialty can make a run for a title? Do you think they can get that far in MMA?
Oh, absolutely. Again, it's one of those things where if you find someone who's got a big enough specialty that they can put people into their specialty, but have the physicality and skill set to deal with the other ranges and the other areas, you can make it happen. I think Gary Tonon's probably one of the likely candidates for making that sort of thing. Obviously, Imanari had a big impact along with, Aoki and his rubber guard style. Is it going to beat everyone every time? No, but there are very few people that will beat everyone every time anyway. But I definitely think, Gary has that ability. He's got the physicality. He's got the wrestling and striking. And obviously, his leg locks are world-class. For his weight, he's, one of, if not the best in the world when it comes to submission grappling. So I think he can be one of those guys that can kind of make a title run for it. Obviously, his run will be in ONE. It would be nice to see him come across to the UFC. I don't know whether he ever will or be able to. And obviously, when you look at someone like Palhares, you can see how devastating those leg locks can be. I think the problem with Palhares is he was not just a specialist, but too focused on the one area. He became too enamored with finishing big people. And then once he got into a couple of situations where he couldn't finish them,
give up effectively almost.
Basically, yeah. Whereas, if he had that ability to deal with those other ranges, and then keep taking the person back to the leg lock, I think he would have caught more people. If he had, sorry.
So I was gonna say it wasn't too long. I went back and watched Paul Harris versus Alan Belcher, if you remember that name. And Belcher went and played the game with him at the time. I was astounded because it was like he's gonna get caught. Now he's passing. Now he's going through. He's attacking. It was an incredible match to watch for a guy that you associate with kickboxing.
Well, I was actually going to bring that one up. That was you kind of jumped the gun on me, but that's all right. But yeah, Alan Belcher trained with Dean Lister, and Dean Lister was one of the first guys to really delve deep into leg locks. I mean, most people are familiar with him. He was one of the guys that said, why would you ignore 50% of the body? And John Danaher, that stuck with him, and obviously you've seen what he's done with the Danaher Death Squad and those guys, and now the B team and all the Mexican ground karate and all that sort of stuff. So, but the thing is the reason these guys are so successful, and I think this is why Belcher was so successful, because he looked at what Palahara was going to do and then built a strategy around it, but not at the expense of the rest of his game. So he was able to, and the problem was with Palahara, he was so focused on that one area when he couldn't get it. He wasn't trying other strategies, didn't change his what he was doing. And whereas you can see, like even GSP, his goal was to take people down, but he would also get into striking exchanges when people got back to their feet. And then once people got caught up into this striking exchange, boom, he went back to his takedown. And I think that's what Palahara was lacking, was that ability to move out of his strength, draw people into it, and then suddenly take them back. And again, that's what you've got to be able to do as a specialist. You've got to be able to come out of your comfort zone. Like Khabib has some very awkward striking, and you would never teach someone to strike like that. But for what he does is extremely effective, and he draws people into, he will start striking with them and with his angles. And as soon as they get drawn into the striking battle, boom, he's on their leg again. He's pushing you up against the cage and dragging you onto the ground and grinding you. So even though he relied on his strength to finish his fights, he had the ability to come out of his strength, draw people into an exchange in an area that wasn't his strength, so he could get back into his strength. And I think Gary Tonin, as I said, has that ability. He has the ability to strike, to wrestle with people, to draw them into different parts of the game, so that he can then go back to his strength once people get drawn in and overcommit into playing a certain part of the strategy. And kind of DC would do that as well with his wrestling. He'd draw people into the striking, and then as soon as he got close enough, boom, he'd grab them and kind of take them down.
He always, with his height, I always figured he had the ability to just walk underneath people when they threw a 1-2 half the time. But
well, yeah, I mean, that definitely helps, but you've still got to be able to get the person to commit into striking with, because you know how hard it is to close a distance on someone who doesn't want to be taken down. You've got to get them to step forward. You've got to get them to commit. If his striking wasn't at the point that people were afraid of it and needed to commit to counter, he wouldn't be able to walk in on them.
Well, this kind of reminds me a lot of like Robert Whittaker's attacks, because he throws that 1-2 where he holds out the cross to throw the high right kick, and he oftentimes sets that up to get into the double, in opportunities like this. But
Jackson Wink does something very similar. If you look at Carlos Condit, he throws the punch, and as he's punching, he's already leaning over, and that kick is coming through behind it as well.
Yeah.
So again.
Well, GSP would do the same thing almost with, I don't even know the technical term for it, but you throw the overhand right to just grab so that you can effectively do the ankle pick. I can't remember what that motion was, but they're like these really lazy single legs almost, where you throw in and then you scoop the leg and you get this motion of turning him down. You see it?
Yeah, because he gets the hands up to defend the strike, which opens up the lower body. And again, what he was very good at is he did use the Superman punch to set up his,
Yes.
kick, which then would lead into the shot. But what confused a lot of people is they didn't realize he did a Superman punch on his lead side, which we know as a switch jab.
Yeah.
So he would do like a flying switch jab, but people would always think of it as a Superman punch. But the Superman punch is more that blitz or power cross, jumping cross off the back leg, whereas he would go the Superman cross, step and kick, and then he would jump and switch jab and then do it on the other side, and people would get confused because as far as they were concerned, it's a Superman punch, but it's coming from the two different angles, and he was able to transition between the two, and then when people were confused about which punch was coming, boom, he would shoot in underneath as he set it up.
Yeah, right. I'll have to go back and watch that because you're right. I just remember Superman punch, but not whether if he's ending up in
the jumping switch to catch people on the other side. But everyone, whenever the commentators talk about it, they didn't notice the slight finesse and variation in which leg or foot or hand was being used, and it was just called, because he was jumping, they go Superman punch, but it wasn't. He was actually doing a Superman punch and a jumping switch on the other side, and that's why he would catch people off and able to enter in underneath.
So I think ultimately, if we go back, yes, a leg locker could win a title. That's what you're saying. I know we're probably, I feel like this is happening pretty organically. I feel like we've probably go on for a while, but I'm sure we've got stuff to do with ONE, because you're talking Tonin. If anyone's listening overseas, ONE does not really have a footprint over there. I think they've finally got some television distribution in the US, but I am told that they are doing better numbers, not revenue, but because they've got effectively Asia Pacific covered through YouTube in emerging markets. Do you think ONE can challenge the UFC, or do you think they almost ONE will kind of fill the void of what Pride used to be over here, or kind of, where do you think that goes in?
Look, I actually think it's even a totally different market to Pride.
Well, yeah, one was Japan. This is a lot of emerging economies where they'll.
Yeah, so this is more that Indonesian, Singapore. Yeah, I think there's they filled a void over there. I think they will gain a niche market in the US and some other Western countries, and obviously places like Australia. But that's mainly because we're so close, and we get fighters going over, so they're more likely to draw from our pool than they really are. They you have a look at it, the only real US fighters are either big names or people that come out of certain gyms. It's predominantly the Oceania Asia market that they're kind of targeting. That's where the majority of their fighter comes from. And that's where most of their viewers come from as well. Again, I don't think they're probably particularly strong in Japan. I think they have the opportunity to kind of reach into China, but I think China is more likely to latch onto the UFC because I think it's a bigger brand. I think they've already set up a performance institute in China, and they've already got the Ultimate Fighter coming out of there as well. So I think not even the Chinese-Japanese market is there. I think it's more that Indo-Asian, Oceania type region where they're going to be strongest, and I think they'll have. I don't think they're going to compete with the UFC in their market. I think they're just going to be another specialist brand. The hardcore guys will go watch ONE. They'll watch Bellator. They'll watch World Extreme.
Ryzen is still on. KSW.
Right.
Poland is still kicking around.
Is it you want PFA? Is it
PFL, Professional Fighters League?
PFL, yeah. PFL. So you've got these other markets. PFL is doing $1 million prizes in their tournaments and stuff like that as well. I think it's just going to become another niche MMA brand in the West. I think it'll do well. because, you know, they do have a good product. They mix in their cage Muay Thai, you know, so they're kind of drawing on a couple of different markets to kind of bring them all together.
Yeah, doing stand-up
So, yeah,
with,
you know,
with 8-ounce gloves
and
in a
what I
cage and all that sort of thing.
Say, John Wayne Parr is the one that kind of started the cage Muay Thai, even though he probably doesn't get the credit in ONE.
I remember him fighting Tony Bonello at what was the cage? King of the Cage, and it was like a 45-second fight or something. I remember. It was very, very short at the time. He just got taken down and had no concept of what to do.
Well, at the time he had no. But what's interesting to see is his kids are now doing Muay Thai, obviously, but also Jiu-Jitsu, and are very accomplished grapplers as well. Yeah. So
you know, I've read some of these interactions he's had with Renzo talking about this online, and
yeah, even though he's a very much still hardcore Muay Thai person, he recognizes the value of grappling and MMA, and otherwise he wouldn't be teaching it to his children. So yeah, but I think, you know, I think ONE has its own market. I think it's going to be very hard for anyone to overtake the UFC in their market. You know, Ryzen has kind of filled the gap of where Pride was, but again, you know, Ryzen only runs what half a dozen events a year. Whereas
I had even forgotten that Dream capitulated. Like I kind of forgot that Ryzen was a reincarnation of Dream, which was a reincarnation of Pride, and they were running these sort of events.
Well, what happened was the Pride guys were under some sort of contractual agreement where they couldn't actually run another event for several years. So I think that's why they set up Dream. They weren't running it per se, but they were kind of connected through to it. Dream was there. It never really took off until I think the Pride guys got back on board because their non-compete period had expired, and so they then got back. And so that's why Ryzen is very different to Dream and more similar to kind of Pride. They've kind of got back on the boat. I don't think it's all the same people, but I think there are some of the familiar faces in there. You know, I believe Len Hart she's back in there.
But it's kind of like even when you think of Elite XC, I kind of forgot that existed because I think of Strike Force. I don't think of Elite XC and how that kind of came into UFC. Anyway, 2 last questions and then we'll get out of here. Top 5 Australian fighters first, because you've been around the scene. So you were the first guy to go in the UFC. Didn't have great success, but we now have guys entering the UFC who are title holders, which is a pretty significant thing, because I remember on that journey for years they were saying, you know, countries like Australia and England will never be title challengers because we don't have wrestling. And that argument seems to have gone out the window these days, where it only seems to be a component. And even watching Chael Sonnen the other day, he was saying that even dominant wrestlers, when they come into MMA, aren't necessarily that dominant as fighters. So we've got a lot of guys to look at in there. Who sort of rounds out your top 5?
Well, just before we go into the top 5, obviously a big part of that is the cage. I think that's what makes the difference. So obviously wrestling is still very important. The reason, you know, Bisping still did a lot of wrestling, you know, Alex, Rob, these guys do a lot of wrestling, but what they do is very well integrated into use with the cage. And I think that's if you understand how to use the cage, you can deal with people who have very strong specialties in certain areas if they have not incorporated the use of the cage effectively in their game. And that was a big part of Khabib, is when he first started fighting, if you watch his fights, he mainly shot singles and doubles in the middle and maybe drove to the cage, took them down, but basically worked off singles and doubles. Then he had a couple of tough fights.
So you're quickly getting sprawled on. You've got room to back up is what we're looking at. But if we can move them against something, yeah.
Fighting, but it was extremely tiring for him as well. And then he realized if he could push people to the cage, he could work his body lock. He would still drop down for singles and doubles, but no longer shooting off the cage. So it's not as energy taxing, not as risky because you're not being opened up to striking. If he missed it, he could then climb back up into the body, back into the body lock, drag and trip them down. If they defended by opening up the legs, he'd pick up the single. And then his game really evolved, and his ability to dominate started to skyrocket, in my opinion, once he understood how to use the cage effectively. If you look at a lot of his last couple of fights, everything was on the cage.
But that's not new though, because when I go back to like 2006, this is exactly how Anth would train. It was, I'm not really worried about striking. I will walk into you as necessary to pin you up against something. And then
Absolutely.
we're going straight in for that bear hug penetration, and we'll see what comes out of that effectively.
No, it's not. But the difference is you need more than just being able to shell up and walk forward, because people are now getting much better at cutting angles. People are much more aware of the risk of being on the cage. So people now tend to not back up as much, but start to circle off. And so that's what he became very good at, is he understood that when they're off the cage, he needed to be able to draw them in. So he would still shoot for singles and doubles in the open. But then what he would do is, once he made connection, he would then drive to the, even just with an ankle, he would drive into the cage, because he knew once he got to the cage, he could climb up the body. So the strategy has been around for a while. Obviously, it's just been refined a lot more. And as I said earlier, it's that ability to draw someone into their strength, to think they're in a position to dominate, so you can then drive into your strength.
And
now
it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I was reading a career breakdown on Cro Cop not too long ago, and they were pointing out the exact opposite fashion. And the argument was, why didn't Cro Cop have success in the UFC? And they were able to nail it. He went from a ring into a cage. And if you watch all of his Pride fights, he's just gradually cutting someone off until he puts them into a corner to unleash those legs. And that didn't happen at all. And then all of a sudden he was, virtually exposed, because once they took that away from him, then they learned to put him on the back foot, which is arguably what Fedor did in their fight, where he couldn't get off initially. Anyway, so top 5 Australian fighters.
Obviously, Volkanovski, absolute legend. He's done fantastic stuff. Obviously, he's the current champion at the moment. And he's been absolutely phenomenal in his performance, and his last fight was absolutely brilliant. I know it was a couple of
you shouldn't be doing that. That's wrong. That's wrong. How are you getting out of this?
Yeah, there's a couple of tense moments in there, but man, he showed the heart and fortitude, the Australian spirit. Don't give up, keep fighting, and he's still the champion because of that. So obviously, he's a big part of it. Before that, Rob Whittaker. Rob, absolutely fantastic. Again, he's one of those people who focuses on his striking, but he understands the use of the cage and the ability to get to the cage to get up. He uses the cage to kind of circle people into his kicks and punches and at range. And obviously a champion for quite a while. Had a lot of difficult situations with illnesses and injuries and things like that. Looking forward to seeing him fight for the belt again. Hopefully he's going to review what happened last time, had come back with a better strategy. I think what happened in his last fight, he just got drawn in a little bit too much.
No, I disagree. I think they were too anxious. I think 2 of the worst fights that I've ever seen fought was Whittaker versus Adesanya. And when
Oh no, I agree. I don't think that was a good fight.
But what's his name? Verdun fought Stipe. When you don't think that you can counter, they just effectively ran at them and got countered flush in the open in the middle of their fight. I think Whittaker has to come back a little bit more relaxed and kind of force Adesanya into his space and see if he can sort something out from there.
Yeah, look, it's always a difficult situation, because Rob is very much a counter fighter. And Izzy is an even more established counter fighter. Like he's way more patient. He'd be willing to sit back a lot more, because if he can land a couple of shots and win on points, he's not going to take the risk. I think with Rob, he's the counter fighter. And I think he was aware that Izzy was a counter fighter, and he thought the best way would be to, I'm assuming, again, I have no idea, was maybe to try and overwhelm him, not give him the opportunity to get set. But I think that just literally played right into Izzy's game. So
yeah, it
like you
came
said,
off as nervousness to me, the same way that Verdun tried to trace Stipe and just crossed him. Perhaps I'm wrong about that, but you know, when someone gets too anxious and too overburdened, so they just kind of run at you.
Yeah. So obviously, man, we've got we've had a lot of great fighters over the years. You know, some of the old school names like George Soteropoulos, Ross Pearson, even though he fought out of the UK.
By. Yeah.
He now fights out of the Central Coast. Some of those old school names. Can't forget the ladies. We've got Jessie Jess fighting at the moment. She's doing quite well. She's obviously come off injury recently. I think she's been off for 12 months or so with a knee reconstruction. I think she could do some big things. Who else? Anderson. Having a mental blank on
Megan Anderson. Name. We got Beck Rawlings, the female fighters that I can think of from that space.
Well, Megan's fought for the belt and stuff, so she's a talented 145er. I think she's got to do a little bit more work on certain areas of the game to kind of round it out. And I think we've seen that starting to happen in the last couple of fights. We've got a few guys, obviously. A few new guys kind of making appearances in the UFC. We'll see how they go. We've had some ups and downs. Obviously, all-time great. We can't ignore Mark Hunt. The guy's an absolute legend. We love Mark Hunt's walk-off KOs for years.
He's apparently living up here too these days.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah. And obviously, bouncing off Mark Hunt, you've got Tai Tuivasa, who's still fighting. He's a kid with a lot of talent. I think he can do big things in the division. I just think, again, he needs he's got that one area he's very good at. He just needs to be able to survive in the other areas, to draw people into being able to take them back into his game. So there's obviously a couple of areas he kind of struggles with. I think, like Mark Hunt, has very good double leg defense, but I think both those guys struggle a little bit with the single leg. And again, I think that's where Stipe worked that out with Hunt. That Hunt's sprawl was phenomenal. You shoot a double on him, but you pick up one leg, he was literally just falling over. And I think Tai is a little bit, not to the same degree, but I think needs to work on a few other areas of his takedown defense. Obviously Tyson Pedro, haven't seen him for a while. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing him back. He had a few injuries. He shot up very quickly in the division, was doing some great things, had a couple of tough fights, which set him back everybody
then bit. I think we're up to 9 now.
Oh.
Very complimentary of everybody.
We've got a lot of great talent outside of the top 2, our title holders. I didn't want to ignore the guys who kind of helped build our history. It's important to recognize the work they did, and obviously the new guys which are still in there and fighting, but haven't quite hit the top of their game. So and again, there's still a lot more people that deserve recognition or doing great things in the sport, but we'll leave it at that.
All right, and I guess before we wrap up, then a much more acute question then: who do you reckon are the top 5 MMA guys of all time in your opinion? Then,
obviously,
so you got 5.
5. All right, I'll do it. I'll start with one of my favorites. Is Anderson Silva.
So he fits in at number 5 or number 1, you reckon?
Don't tell me I've got to put him in order.
Oh, well, what's the point of having a fight if there's not a winner, right? What are we watching here?
I just want to give my top 5. I shouldn't have to put them because it wasn't.
Out of all the sports that you could pick for just, shouldn't we all just get along?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just be friends and fight each other for fun. GSP, obviously, super dominant in his time.
So I got the same ones as you so far.
Fedor, I mean, you can't ignore what Fedor did in Pride. Absolutely phenomenal. I've got Khabib, obviously, in there.
Don't have Khabib in there.
I think, honestly, he's a tough one. I think because he was so dominant for when he was in there, but I don't think he was in the sport at the highest level for long enough. But you just can't ignore what he did while he was in there, and obviously Mighty Mouse as well.
Yeah, I got DJ as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Just the amount of title challenges, his dominance in the division. Now there are a lot of
That's 5.
That's a lot of other great fighters. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to go into any others. You know, they're probably my top 5. So which one? Obviously, you didn't have Khabib. Which was the other one that you had?
Well, Jon Jones was my number 1. Despite all,
he was actually in my list as well.
So the way that I would just
light heavyweight, but since you limited it to 5, I don't know. See, I think he has the potential to be one of the all-time greatest if he ever makes it into the heavyweight division.
Well, I guess I think the thing is that, as you said, so the argument against Khabib is that he wasn't in there long enough. I think oftentimes on the rise up, he wasn't facing the top tier competition that some of the other guys. Of course, he's the only guy that's undefeated. But I don't hold it against guys that stay in too long so much. So again, if we talk about Anderson or Fedor, we know that they went on a long skid. But I think arguably for fighters, you kind of have to look at a key 5-year period and who they were fighting.
Yeah, their prime period.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think, you know, if we look at MMA as a sport, it's one of the only sports that we can participate where you have the option to end the game early if you're that dominant. And so if you can knock someone out or submit them, and you're only 30 seconds into what's supposed to be a 25-minute bout, I think that counts for something. So, you know, perhaps he's not there yet, but I think Ngannou might very well be. You know, if you have 15 fights and your total cage time is 17 minutes, I think that gives you a pretty good argument for saying that you're the best fighter of all time.
Oh, look, Ngannou definitely has the potential to be one of the all-time greats. Obviously, there was a couple of fights in there that he lost, but I think they made him better for it. I think he's now come out. But I'm interested to see how he does against Cyril Gane. Obviously, coming up against another big striker who's probably not as aggressive, but probably more skilled. I think we need a few more fights, a couple of title defenses before we even start talking about him in that all-time greats. And as you said, Khabib is one of the enigmas that I struggle with, because as I said, when he did face the best, even if it was for a short time, he was dominant. He finished them all. You know, he finished all the top guys. I really would have liked to have seen, you know, another year or two at least, you know, maybe another.
And that's why I think he left too. And the same thing, like I got a lot more respect for GSP for leaving for multiple years and then coming back in than just having, you know, to be able to walk in and say, yeah, I'll fight Bisping and do it with that long of layoff at a higher weight, I think speaks arguably as good to the record before it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, and as I said, with Jon Jones, it's particularly interesting because he was so dominant until he got to a point where I think I heard an interview where he said it was too easy to win by beating them at my strength. And that's why he fights people at their strengths. And until you're able to kind of look back at what he did and how he did it, you can't really appreciate what he's done. Because again, people look at how hard the fights were, not how they were done. And I think that's, if you can go back and kind of look at his fights and look at how he fights, And again, the rematches are what is so telling to me. They kind of show that what he was doing was trying to beat them at them. If that kind of makes sense.
Well, it does. But I also heard the rumors that he would only train like 3 days a week for some of these fights. Like I heard he's one of those guys that he knows he's that good, doesn't even really train and just shows up on the night.
And he was even admitting he was on coke binges.
Yes.
In the lead up, like, I mean, and again that comes down to that head case thing. And again, you know, he's a head case. He doesn't feel like he needs to train. He feels he's so good that he can beat them at their own game, that he can do coke binges. And as he said, it was an excuse because he would do the coke binges because he felt he was so good, but he was also putting in an excuse in the back of his mind that if he lost, it wasn't because he wasn't the better fighter, because he was the coke binge.
Yeah, fair enough.
He was, and again, it's that fragile ego where he has to believe he's the best. He believes he's the best, but part of him doubts it. So he sets up a contingency plan where he's got an excuse if he doesn't win. And I think that's why he does a lot of some of the stupid stuff. As I said, it's sadly that being a head case outside of the cage is also affecting how he's going to be remembered and what he does in the cage as well. And again, that's one of the reasons I like DJ so much, and why I had to put him in was because, you know, he just, every fight evolved. He brought something different to the game. He brought people at his strengths, at their strength. He did whatever was necessary. Obviously, that fantastic run in his division where he just absolutely dominated for so long. And even that fight he lost before leaving the UFC, I don't actually think he lost. I actually thought he won. It
was split again, wasn't it, with Cejudo before he left?
Yeah. Cejudo. Well, yeah, he finished Cejudo in their first match and then obviously gets the split on his loss. And I personally thought he won that match. I thought he did enough.
But he's gone down twice in one now. I think he's lost two fights. So I have that right in the last year and a bit. I have to go back.
I know he's lost one. I'm not sure if he's lost two.
Yeah.
But again, that's one of the issues I have with ONE as well, is because it's the promoter who's the commission. I have issues with, because I've heard stories. Now, again, they're just stories, they're rumors. But sometimes when you look at the size discrepancy on some of the athletes, because they've obviously got the weight cutting rule where you can't be dehydrated, and whereas we're seeing some fighters with massive size discrepancies. And if you've got that weight cut rule, how is that discrepancy so much? Unless people are not being treated equally. And again, as I said, commissions, when you don't have an external commission in charge of ensuring all the rules are being followed, how can you trust the rules are being followed? I mean, you know, a promoter's job is to sell fights and to build champions. It's not to help anyone, it's to promote their business. And if they feel a local champion is going to do better for them than an international one, well, what are they willing to do that if it means it's going to be greater revenue?
True.
I'm not saying they are, you know, they maybe are that, but again, you're
not saying they're not either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All
right.
It's an interesting situation. So because there's been a couple of guys who've done so in the in ONE, and you could say that maybe the UFC skill level isn't as high as people believe it is. I don't think that's the case. I do think the guys at the top are really at the top across the planet. I do think there's a lot of talent at various levels that come into the show, not necessarily all at the highest level, but that they are generally filtered out before they get to anywhere where they're challenging for titles anyway. So,
well, I will say I'm getting very, very excited about the Bellator roster as it continues to develop. I think they're doing a very good job of bringing in international fighters. I really like it. The really competitive matches.
Well, they've been smart. They brought in UFC guys with name value to help build it, but then they're also seeking their own talent from outside the UFC to try and build some more names. And I will say it was nice seeing Fedor win in Russia as well. So that was
pretty fast for 45. Pretty fast hands for 45.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I think hopefully we've covered everything. Hopefully people listening aren't bored and haven't tuned out by now.
I hope not. They're going to think you're a COVID doctor after the first 45 minutes of this talk, I think so. I'll have to cut this up.
I was a doctor of love. I'm now a doctor of infection.
Fair enough. Well, it was good to speak, and maybe I'll even run into you again sometime down the road.
No problem. Sounds good. Maybe we can do a couple of months or a year or so. We'll do a follow-up and see where everything's going.
Happy to. All right, awesome. Good to speak, King.
Always a pleasure. Good to be the king. Thanks for having me on.
All the best. Thanks very much. Cheers.